Parents, professionals, good morning and welcome. My name is Amy Ferreira. I'm Director of Admissions and Enrollment here at the amazing Perkins School for the Blind. It's wonderful to see you all here in person at our most cherished event. It's our 40th year running the Early Connections Conference. This year's theme is engagement. We hope today can serve as a new beginning for knowledge, resources, and networks. From this day forward, you are forever engaged with Perkins. We have a fabulous day planned for you, and we're excited to learn and share with you. Thank you for choosing to be here. Thank you for trusting us with your journey, and thank you for allowing us to share our expertise. Speaking of thank yous, many folks at Perkins helped put this event together. Thank you to Perkins leadership, our unbelievable lineup of presenters, facilities, food services, today's vendors, Perkins IT, Boston Light and Sound, all the volunteers, marketing, the admissions team, and one woman in particular, Justine Rhines. Thank you for your support in making today so special and your dedication to today's content. If you need support throughout the day, or if you have any questions, we are unbelievably prepared to help you. So please locate a Perkins employee or a volunteer. You can access today's programming from the QR codes on the table or the large print program. Both include a schedule, a campus map, the session locations, and presentation descriptions. After this morning, we will have 4 different breakout sessions to choose from across multiple campus locations. And around 1 p.m., we'll see you back here for lunch together. Please don't forget to stop by our vendors or to enter the raffle. So, it's time to get started. It's an absolute honor to introduce Miss Brenda Allair.
Hi, everybody, and good morning. I am so excited and honored to be here today. As Amy said, I'm really excited to see everybody in person. This is a conference that I've attended in the past as a parent, so this is a very special moment for me. In my professional role, I'm a teacher of students with visual impairments, and I'm the lead educational consultant with the New England Consortium on Deafblindness. I also worked for many years as the infant toddler coordinator with community programs here at Perkins. I've been in the field of education for nearly 20 years and a TVI for almost 15 years. I'm someone who can say that I genuinely love my career, and also that this career would not have been possible or even crossed my mind without the birth of my youngest daughter. Before she was born, I worked in early education, but I had never heard of a TVI. I am passionate about families and family education because I was one, and I am one, and I know the value of hearing from somebody who's walked in your shoes. And I also believe that families are the ones who are most invested in the success of their child. So while some of what I'll share today comes from my professional experiences working with hundreds of children and families over the past 20 years, much of it comes from what I learned alongside my own family as we navigated this journey. As I talk about my family and about my daughter, you'll notice that I use identity-first language. This is how she's always chosen to talk about herself as a blind person, and so I do that as well. So how many of you here are parents? Great, wonderful to see you. Grandparents? I know there's at least one, excellent. And professionals? Lots of you, wonderful. Well, welcome to everyone. And for parents, I'm just curious, you don't have to raise your hand, how many of you have already checked your phones this morning for messages from the babysitter? Yep, feel that. I know that you guys have chosen to spend your day here with us, and I'm so glad, and I know Perkins is so excited about that. I hope at the end of the day that you also are glad that you've chosen to spend your day here with us. This morning, I want to share with you how our family created the story that we have now. It's a story that I love and one that brings us genuine joy. Some of you might be old enough to remember the Choose Your Own Adventure books that were popular when I was young. These were books where every chapter ended with a question, an option, and you got to make a decision and then turn to the page to see how the story unfolded. For the parents here, I know some of you might be new to this journey, and the thought of making any kind of choices can feel really overwhelming. You might not even know what your story is just yet, let alone what choices you might want to make. For the providers, I encourage you not only to think about your own stories, but also to think about the role you play in the journeys of the families and children that you work with every day. No matter where you are in this journey, I hope that as we talk this morning, you'll see that engaging in your story, looking for and choosing paths that make sense for you and your family, and sometimes taking a detour you hadn't anticipated, can help you create an incredible journey for you and your child. So the picture up here is a picture of my daughter, Jill. She's about 4 or 5 months old in this picture, and she's wearing a really cute little purple and white checked outfit, and she's smiling with her face turned away from the camera. How many of you have the story that you tell about your child? You know, this is the get the hard stuff out of the way really quickly story. This is the one that I call the elevator pitch for doctors and therapists and teachers. It's the story that tries to sum up your experience with your child in just a few sentences. I have that story too, and it's about my youngest daughter, Jill. And for me, the story sounded something like this. At 33 weeks pregnant, I had an ultrasound that found a number of things that were wrong with the baby. We had no idea what was wrong, except that we were told it was really bad and we should prepare for the worst. Jill was born at 37 weeks, and while a lot of things didn't look quite right, no one really knew what was going on with her. So we took her home. At 8 weeks old, at a doctor's appointment that I so smartly decided to attend all by myself, a doctor looked at me and said, "Your daughter's totally blind," and then I left. We immediately enrolled in early intervention. By 5 months old, Jill was diagnosed with kidney failure, and she had a transplant shortly after her first birthday. She continued to have significant developmental delays, and by the time she went to preschool, she had only recently started walking and saying a few words. That is not the whole story. It's not the worst parts of it. Some of those were really, really bad. And it's not the best parts of it, because much of that was still ahead of us. But it was the story that I told to doctors and nurses and physical therapists and occupational therapists and speech-language pathologists and the moms that I met at playgroup. It was the story that I didn't tell to strangers in the supermarket or the people I ran into in the baby aisle at Target, because for those people, I didn't have a story at all. Most importantly, this was the story I told myself deep in the middle of the night when I was frantically Googling how to help her. And while that story is true, it isn't complete. What I find even now as a professional is that when I ask a parent, "So, tell me about your child," I get some version of this elevator speech. And when I ask for more, who is he? What does he like to do? What are your favorite things to do together? Some families will look at me and say, "I don't know," and nobody's ever asked me that before. So I'm here today, and I'm asking you to think about the story you want to be telling for yourself and for your child. The image up on the screen is 2 clouds, and they're filled with words like sadness, fear, and anxiety. And the colors are very kind of muted and sad. We're going to talk a lot today about engaging and about looking forward and being excited. But during those early years, the years some of you might be in right now, I had no idea what I was doing. I was scared, and I was worried, and I was incredibly stressed. I was juggling appointments, driving back and forth to Boston a few times a week. My family and I live in Western Massachusetts, so this was an adventure for me. I looked like I had it all together, but behind the scenes, I can tell you, it was not going well. And the words that are up here, they weren't just my words. They're words that I've heard countless times from families as I meet them at the beginning of their own journeys. When Jill was born, my two older children were 6 and 4. They were pretty typically developing, and I loved being a mom. I was experienced in early childhood. I even had some experience with a child with disabilities who was in my early childhood program. But this experience, being a parent of a child with a disability, this was way out of my league. When Jill was an infant, I mostly wanted to sit on the floor and stare at her and cry. In fact, I actually did that a lot, except when I cried in the shower. I didn't want to talk to anyone, except that I also desperately wanted to not be alone in this experience. I wanted to be able to do something, but I didn't know what that might be or how to go about finding it. I wanted to engage, but I had absolutely no idea where to start. The image on this slide is of Jill. She's about a year old here, and she's sleeping on our couch in a little pink and purple nightgown, and she has a NG feeding tube taped up on her face. I have kept a journal since I was in 3rd grade. I still have it. It has Hello Kitty on the front. And it had some real gems in it when I looked through it, including one that says, "I hate it when my teacher makes me talk in front of the class." Writing is how I process. It's how I try to make sense of things. So you can imagine, in the beginning of this journey, I wrote all the time. Mostly I wrote at 2 o'clock in the morning when the feeding pump went off, or when I had Googled myself down a rabbit hole of fear. What I wrote a lot in that first year was how desperately I wanted my life to go back to normal. And this is a quote from that journal. "I crave normal the way sleep-deprived people crave rest. Normal feels entirely lost to me, and yet it is all I want." I was 100% in love with my baby, but I was also exhausted and terrified, and I had lost all sense of what my future and our future as a family was going to be like. I needed to be with other people who had a story like mine, to be with other people who were living this life I had found myself in, and who would not be afraid of it. I wanted to find out what a new normal might look like for us. And the image on this slide is a cardboard house made out of a box, and it has a welcome sign and some happy little flowers in the front. There's also a quote here that says, "I felt that we lived in a box. We were isolated in this dark, limited space defined by the illness. I had to figure out how to turn on some lights and cut a window in that box." And that's a quote by Barbara Gill in a book called Changed by a Child. During this time, I read a lot of books. This was in the days before Facebook and Instagram and TikTok, so the only way I could really find other stories like mine was in books written by other parents. These stories were few and far between, but they were instrumental in helping me begin to understand what it was that I wanted. And what I wanted was to get out of the box we had found ourselves in. We did okay day to day in our little space at home. I was getting the hang of Jill's medical equipment, and I was really happy to sit on the couch and cuddle with her. The kids were sort of figuring out ways to interact with her, but we were still mostly alone and mostly focused on all the things we thought we couldn't do, and all the things I thought Jill was missing out on. I was still in the part of the story where I didn't even know that I could choose, let alone which path I might want. We weren't living in any way that felt true to who we wanted to be as a family, and we weren't living in a way that felt like the childhood I wanted to give all of my children. So I started looking for some ways to cut a hole in the box. This slide has 2 photos on it. The first one is me, a much younger version of me, with Jill holding a pre-cane and walking on our sidewalk. And the other one is Jill in a little pink outfit holding a toy and sitting on a classroom floor. My mom is my biggest cheerleader. She's also a persistent, stubborn woman who has passed those traits along to me. And she adores her grandchildren. Shortly after we started early intervention, our service coordinator made a referral to Perkins Infant Toddler Program. I was starting to look through the packet of information they had shared, and my mom saw that they offered parent-child playgroup time, and she encouraged me to attend. And I said, no, absolutely not, no way. I had really good excuses. I have 3 kids, it's a really long drive, my baby is sick. But mostly, I was just scared. The thing is, even though I knew I needed to get out of our box, I was also terrified of what it might be like to actually venture out into the world again. I had a new identity as a mom of a baby with disabilities, and I didn't know how to be that person out in public. I was unsure how to care for her around other people, how to explain that even at 6 months old, she still needed to be held like a newborn, or how to use her feeding tube when we weren't at home, how to answer the question, what do you think she sees? I didn't want to go, but I also knew that I needed to, and that my mother would never let it go if I didn't. Perkins Infant Toddler Program was one of the first and brightest lights to turn on inside of our little box, and I am forever grateful to the teachers and parents that I met there. I can still remember exactly how I felt walking into the classroom that first day, seeing a little boy walking along the edge of the toy shelves, gently touching and exploring each of the items. He was playing, and he had a huge smile on his face as he held his mom's hand to show her what he had found. I stopped, and I just watched. And for the very first time, I could imagine what Jill might be like as a toddler. Not just the baby that I had, not just blind, but a fun, happy child. These women at group, and back then it was mostly moms at our group, although I'm happy to say that that has changed over the years. They told their stories and we learned from each other. The TVIs in group and the ones that came to our home, they taught us how to play with Jill, how to encourage her to explore, and later on, how to begin exposing her to Braille and her pre-cane. At group, I had the joy of watching children like Jill who were just a little bit older than her, and they were learning to play and communicate, and I realized that my child could learn those things too. I like to think that the day I went to group was my first choose your own adventure question that I had to answer. Go, don't go. And making the decision to go changed everything. How much did it change things? Well, earlier this week when I posted about how nervous I was about this keynote, the first people to reply, "You've got this," were moms I met that day when Jill was 6 months old. And 22 years later, we're still connected and still making sure to tell each other, we've got this. The photos here are pictures of my 3 kids. One of them is they're in a pumpkin patch, and the other one is 3 of them on a sidewalk with Jill riding on a scooter with a little blue baseball hat. One of the next choices we had to make was how we wanted our family to work together. For the first couple of years of Jill's life, she was in and out of the hospital very frequently. This meant I was away, staying with her, while the older children stayed with grandparents or friends so my husband could work. This was working for us in the sense that everyone was getting cared for, but one day my son came home from preschool with a drawing of our family, and it showed Jill and I on one half of the paper, and my husband and the other 2 kids all the way over on the other half of the paper. And he looked at me and he said, "We're like 2 families, Mama." He didn't say it with any sense of sadness or disappointment. In his little world, this was just a fact of life. Mama and Jillian did things, and Daddy and the kids did things. That was not what I wanted our family to be like, and so I knew we had to find a way to grow together. We chose to engage the children in sessions with our early intervention team so that they could learn how best to play and interact with Jill. We talked to child life specialists about ways to explain Jill's medical and developmental needs to them. And we found that once they had their questions answered, they were quick to treat her just like any other baby sister. We created simple family routines that helped bridge the separation from hospitalizations, pizza and movie night on every discharge day, and that became long-standing family tradition. For me, I also started letting go a little. I wanted to keep Jill safe and protected, but I also wanted her to experience the world and to have fun with her brother and sister. One day, when Jill was probably about preschool or kindergarten age, she was outside playing with her brother and sister. I was on the porch, probably on the phone with a doctor's office. And it's important to this story to know that we live on a fairly busy street at the top of a hill. So that when I heard the kids shouting, "Mommy, Mommy, come quick and see," I dashed out of the house expecting a disaster. Instead, what I saw was Jill smiling and laughing as she rode the kids' scooter down the hill. They were so excited. I did still want to run and grab her, but I held myself back. They were mostly excited that they had been in cahoots against Mom as the three of them. And that was the first time I really saw them as a group together. If your child has siblings, give them a chance to play together. Ask your EI program or your therapist to include them in the sessions that you have at home. You might find, as I did, that kids are pretty quick to accept any differences and to find creative workarounds to make play possible. So this slide has, surprise, more pictures of my child. One of them is Jill holding on to the side of an ice skating rink, and she's smiling and wearing a little white sweatshirt. And the other one is her not quite smiling, wearing her first dance costume. Jill's siblings were active in our community activities. We were regulars at the children's section of the library, attending story time, and often hauling home a wagon full of books, and that is not an exaggeration, and my oldest daughter's a librarian. We played at the playground on nice days, and as they grew, they joined dance class and scouts and youth soccer and softball and many other activities. These activities gave them a chance to make friends and to try new things, to figure out what they enjoyed and what they didn't. We wanted Jill to have the same opportunities to build those skills and to also have fun and be part of her community. She started attending our local preschool when she was 3, and after a few weeks of adjustment, she loved being around other kids. But as she grew, she also wanted to be like her brother and sister, the big kids. She loved her sister's tap shoes, and she would clomp around them in our wooden floors, which are forever ruined, all the time. So when she turned 5, we took her down to sign-up day at the dance studio where our older daughter had been taking classes for years. And we signed her up. We didn't ask permission. We didn't ask if there was a special needs class. We just filled out the form, and I made a little note on the bottom that said she might need a little assistance in class, and I handed it to the studio. We did the same thing for swim class at the Y, and for Girl Scouts after school, and for bowling club on the weekend. She didn't love everything. Swim class, total bust. Pool, way too cold. Kids, way too loud. But the things that she did enjoy, like dance class, gave her a chance to be with other kids her age and to figure out how to navigate her world, literally and figuratively. That white cane that she wanted nothing to do with Mom and Dad came in real handy at the dance studio when I wasn't there. It also gave our community a chance to get to know Jill and to recognize the ways in which they could make things accessible for her. Our local library started ordering Braille copies of the Highlights magazine and more tactile books for the children's section. Her friends and the kids in her after-school activities, they learned to give great verbal directions and to introduce themselves when they ran into her at the supermarket or the farmer's market. And let me tell you, this girl discovered a love for the stage after getting cheers at her first dance recital. And she danced at the studio for another 10 or 12 years, and she has not given up her love of the stage. It wasn't always easy or even successful, but the more we did it, and the more people learned to expect us to be at events, just like everyone else. We looked for activities that were accessible, and we discovered lots of hidden gems in our local area, like accessible playgrounds and adaptive recreation. Most importantly, we led by example. If kids were doing something and Jill wanted to try, We were going to do whatever we could to make that happen. This slide has 3 photos. Anybody want to guess what they are? Pictures of my kid. The first one is Jill wearing a jersey and running on a field with 2 girls from lacrosse. The middle one is her with a woman who was running the Boston Marathon, and the one all the way on this side is Jill with a friend of mine who's wearing a camp t-shirt. Jill didn't get an official diagnosis until she was 14 years old, and when she did, we learned that she was one. Her condition is extraordinarily rare, an experience that many of you might share. There's no support group for us, no organization for families of children with her diagnosis. If there is one for your child's condition, I absolutely encourage you to connect with them, since they can be an invaluable source of information. And if not, I encourage you to do what we did, which was to search for lots of different support organizations for all of the things that we were dealing with. We went to a camp for families of children with transplants, and we met even more families there, and those families shared resources. And we reached out to those resources, and we connected with even more amazing people and more organizations. I want to tell you how much it mattered to me and to my family to meet people who were actively choosing to be part of our world. See, it was easy in some ways to connect with other parents. We were all part of a club that we hadn't necessarily chosen, and we had to figure this out. But these people, the volunteers and student athletes and marathon runners, I was not a marathon runner. I'm not going to be a marathon runner. They wanted to be here with us. They actively chose to spend their time in our world, and they loved being part of it. They were happy to talk to Jill for hours about her deep-seated passion of top 40 music, or to hear again about her performance in the play at school. They saw Jill as a unique, interesting person in her own right, one who just happened to be living with health issues and vision impairment. They didn't value her in spite of her disabilities or because of them. They just saw her and us, and they chose to be part of our lives. They have enriched us in ways that are difficult to put into words. And I wrote again in my journal, this is from there, what I never expected to find on this journey were others who willingly step onto our path, people who choose to walk into these woods with us, and who help show us all of the beauty and fun to be had here. These groups also gave us things to do as a family, and often fun and new opportunities we might not have had otherwise. The older children got to meet other siblings in many of these places, other kids who had a brother or a sister with a disability, and that helped normalize their experiences. The picture on the far side with Jill, with her teammates, she was part of a program called Team Impact, and that's a program where they pair kids with health needs or disabilities with a college sports team. And we just happened to get paired with Springfield College women's lacrosse. They 100% embraced her, and we didn't find out about the program until she was older. So she started that program when she was about 16. It's supposed to end when kids turn 18. Jill's 22 years old now, and she still gets invited to all of the team games. In fact, the reason she's not here with me today is because the team is in the playoffs, and they have a game at 1 o'clock, and she ditched me for that. So she still talks to her teammates. She gets to be a motivational speaker for them, and let me tell you, she is sassy and has a lot to say. And they're friends. She texts with the girls she met years ago, and they stay in touch. These programs also gave us as parents the opportunity as she got older to have a lot of the typical parent experiences that we had had with our older children and thought we were going to miss out on. We clearly have spent a lot of time cheering on a sports team that I still have no idea what the rules are. Jill's gone to camp. She's gone to Perkins outreach programs. She's gone to sleepovers with her friends. She's gone kayaking. I can't even begin to list all of the things she's done. None of these, not a single one, were things I had envisioned for us when she was born. The photo here is a picture of a path that runs through the woods in Maine. It's a wooden trail, and it's an autumn photo, so there's some bright colored leaves in the background. When Jill was little, one of my personal struggles was that I couldn't envision what might lay down the path. If I could somehow figure this out, what would our future or her future be like? For my older children, I could look around at their school or their activities and say, oh, so that's what a child a little bit older is interested in. That's what they do. That's what they like. But for Jill, I had no frame of reference. When she was born, I didn't know any other blind children, and it wasn't until we came to group that I met blind children and blind adults. But once I started engaging and connecting and learning, I discovered that this path is rich with possibilities. Now, I know some of you are here thinking, that's really great for your kid, but my child has a more serious condition, or my child has more significant needs. And I know that because once upon a time, I was that mom too. And I listened to a speaker and thought, I don't think that can ever be my child. But I'm gonna tell you as a parent and as a professional, every single child I have ever met has the potential to participate in their life, to have fun, and to explore. And every single family I have ever met has the power to make change in their own life as well. I truly feel, that every family I've ever met has been a gift to me as a teacher, because their experiences have taught me to believe in what is possible when a child is surrounded by people who are working together, learning together, and growing together. Pictures on this slide are Jill in a wheelchair being pulled by my husband, Jill holding a starfish, and one of my favorite pictures, Jill in a little bucket hat and sunglasses holding her white cane on a beach. Last month, I attended the Deafblind Project Summit, where I met a wonderful young man named Billy Pickens. Billy is living with Norrie's disease, which causes vision and hearing issues. He's an accomplished young man, and he frequently credited his mom and extended family with having high expectations for him. What struck me during his speech was this statement: doing things differently does not mean doing different things. For Billy, that meant he was in classes alongside his sighted peers, using Braille and accessible technology to meet his needs to learn the same curriculum. To me, it also means looking for ways to do the things you want to do as a family, even if they might look a little different than you anticipated. We've been going to Acadia National Park in Maine for years. My husband and I had our honeymoon there. We used to take our older kids camping there all the time. So it's a really meaningful place to our family. It's also full of rocky beaches that are not particularly white cane friendly, hiking trails that are very difficult on differently abled bodies, and mountain peaks heavy on views that my child doesn't care about. So, what is an outdoor-loving family to do? Well, we searched the guidebooks for accessible trails, found one, and one summer morning, set out to the Wonderland Trail, which is where we discovered that the word accessible means different things to different people. The beginning of the trail was great, smooth, easy for white canes or wheelchairs, and quickly turned into a dirt path full of tree roots. Jill was bummed. We were disappointed. The kids were upset. And we decided that we were not going to be that easily deterred. And Jill got to have her first, but not her last, four-wheeling experience in her wheelchair. We go through wheelchairs really quickly. In the years since, I've discovered that most of the time, there really is a way to do something just a little differently. Did you know if you call ahead to a museum, they sometimes have items that your child can touch and explore with their hands, or audio-described tours. That's how we discovered that our totally blind child loves the art museum. It's also how we discovered that she absolutely hates audio-described movies, weirdly enough. So Google the places you might want to go as a family. Ask about accessibility. Give yourself plenty of time so you can let your child explore at their own pace. See if they have Braille or large print menus at your favorite restaurants. And side note, the Cheesecake Factory does have a Braille menu, and if you think the print one is large, I have some advice for you. Ask for the children's menu, it's smaller. Ask your child's TVI if they have ideas about how to make an activity more meaningful. Think about what you and your child like to do. And then tap into those resources you've found as you've engaged in your community and with those organizations, and find a way. This slide has photos of, on the far side, my oldest daughter, Caitlin, and Jill and myself canoeing on a lake in Maine. And the far picture is myself and my husband and Jill with brightly colored pom-poms on our noses. This was a pandemic Zoom experience. And the middle is one of my favorite photos. It's Jill and her brother Damascus, and they have their hands outstretched towards each other. Jill's holding her white cane, and they're standing in front of an ad for Broadway's Aladdin, and the words behind them say, "Exactly what you wished for." Take a moment and think about the things you dreamed about doing with your child before they were born or came into your family. How did you hope that you might spend time together? Did you dream of going to the lake, to an amusement park? Did you dream of laughing together at the playground? Now think about which of those dreams you've put aside, thinking that you might not be able to do them, or your child with a visual impairment might not be able to participate. I want to encourage you to think about what it would take to make those dreams a reality. Most parents, when asked what they want for their child, say, "I just want them to be happy." And we wanted that too for all our children. And we also wanted that for ourselves. Once I cut a couple of holes in that box, once I started making new and interesting choices at the end of each chapter, I got more and more curious about what else we could do or try. And I got a lot less worried about pretty much everything. Instead of asking ourselves what we couldn't do, we started wondering together about what we could do, and we started taking chances. From the time Jill was very little, she's been extremely sensitive to sound. Now, of course, as a blind child, she was using her hearing all the time to gather information. But for her, it was a little more than that. She hated unpredictable noises, things like changing radio stations in the car or horns beeping on the highway. It would drive her completely crazy. But she adores music, and she loves theater even when she's not the one on stage, as do her brother and sister. So we decided to go to New York City. We had a lot of conversation about it, about the loud sounds and the smells, a lot about the smells, and about the people, so many people. We also talked about how mommy frequently gets lost in New York City, but Jill assured me that she could handle that part, which she did very well. I wasn't really very optimistic about this trip, although I knew she probably would love the Broadway show, which she absolutely did. What I didn't expect is that she would stand in the middle of Times Square, cane held in her hand, grinning from ear to ear, and shout out, "I love New York City." She could have been an ad, like on TV, it was great. She was thrilled with everything about the whole day, and she's since gone back several times. We've gone wheelchair roller skating in Bryant Park. She walks faster in New York City than anywhere else that we ever go. And the experience I thought would be a complete disaster was actually one of her favorite things. This slide is two hands reaching toward each other. And they have words inside of them like excited, curious, dreams, school, and friends. I could talk about our experiences all day, but as I said at the beginning, engaging in learning is one important way to start creating the journey that you want to have. And this day is full of wonderful topics from an amazing group of speakers, and I want to make sure that you have time for that. As you move through the day today, I encourage you to make time to connect with the other parents and the providers who are here. Ask questions, tell your story, and start telling yourself the story of the journey that you're choosing to have. Wonder together about the possibilities. Engage in learning, but also engage in building your community. Stop by the tables and make sure you discover some of the organizations here that might be important to you on your own path. I hope that as you do that, the words on this slide, engaged, excited, confident, and curious, become bigger parts of your own stories. Think about all of the chapters you have ahead of you as a parent and all of the different adventures you might choose, and then go and create your own adventures. I wouldn't be true to the values of our family if I didn't end this presentation by saying thank you to my husband and all 3 of our amazing children, Caitlin, Damascus, and Jill. I never tell our story without their permission, and I am deeply grateful that they continue to encourage me to share our experiences. I asked Jill before I left if there was one thing she would want to make sure everyone remembers from today, what would she say? And she told me, tell them, be open to trying something new. Thank you, everybody.